Hello, this is Bob Imbrigiotta, and welcome back to When Men Try to Play God, where we look at problems in America from the big picture view by a chemical engineer and project manager to help us see the root causes of our problems, the real culprits, discover common ground with all Americans, and use newfound unity to solve problems for good for you and future generations. Today, we visit the events that led to our independence, what we call the seeds of independence. You hear that history repeats itself? It does. When we look at the pilgrims up through to the Declaration, you'll find that there are some amazing similarities between those turbulent times and today. We've been here before. Remember the French and Indian War, King George III, the Stamp Act, if not, then sit tight. When I used to hear the phrase, history repeats itself, it never did much for me, until I started to realize what many Americans feel today is similar to what the colonists felt in the 1700s. That's why we are going to focus on the individual's point of view. So here we go. It started in the early 1600s with waves of pilgrims from England coming to America. The wave that stuck was the group from 1620. They came here for religious freedom, to choose their form of worship to God. The pilgrims had to endure a rough 6-week voyage to America. When they arrived in America, they built towns right out of the forest. They were on their own. They had no government to take care of them, just like the killer whale with his proud, upright dorsal fin. It's ironic. Thinkers of that era lived in what was called the Age of Enlightenment, when philosophers like John Locke wrote about the rights of men, words like life, liberty, and the pursuit of estate or property. But did any of that enlightened thinking spark freedom in Europe? Oh, the pilgrims saw the world in its true color, not in black and white. The people in Europe could not appreciate what the colonists had. They didn't know better. They were like killer whales in captivity whose dorsal fin slumps over. Not knowing better is a key theme that we touch upon. Our first seed of independence. The pilgrims, they tasted the pinnacle of freedom. They reached the summit. They launched a new breed of man, one reverent to God, confident, optimistic, hard-working, brave, and American. To chart the progress, we'll use a timeline to help track the events. Starting around 1610, then for about 150 years, the colonists enjoyed the pinnacle of freedom with little interference from the British government. Using our mountaintop example from Section 1, they found the summit and stayed there. Ben Franklin, in a speech to the House of Commons, said the colonists were basically left alone to govern themselves. Very few interruptions from Britain. Did you know the colonists enjoyed one of the highest per capita incomes in the world, more than Great Britain? The middle class was born in America. That's key to remember. A society at the pinnacle of freedom has a big middle class. Now, fast forward 150 years. Great Britain just won the French and Indian War in 1763. This increased Great Britain's territory to the Mississippi. It removed France from the picture. Note the green area. But wars are expensive. It doubled the size of the national debt of Great Britain. Our next seed, put in modern terms, the climate changed from bright and sunny to cloudy and gloomy, brought on by excessive sovereign debt. Just before the end of the French and Indian War, the reigning King George II died. This led to his 22-year-old grandson assuming the throne. Like most royals, plenty of training from royal tutors, but lacking in experience and wisdom. Imagine a 22-year-old as president. Turns out, King George III ruled for 60 years. History tells us he was serious about the responsibility of governing. He was religious with high morals and faithful to his wife, and had 15 kids. They kept detailed records on King George III, including his school essays. Here's one. Look at the words in yellow. Pause if you like. You'd think it's from America. But we were part of one of the freest societies on earth. Yet we ended up declaring our freedom and broke away from Britain. You could say that we left a place with a C on the freedom scale and moved to the summit for an A. Here's a young man ruling the largest empire in the world with a huge debt. He needed more revenue. To him, it was a no-brainer. Compare taxation in the colonies to subjects in his own backyard. Assumptions in project management, the things you believe to be true, see the assumptions by King George III. He assumed the colonists were just like people in Great Britain, and he ignored the needs of the individual. Our next seed, a shift from libertarian to tyrannical rule, from leaving people alone to government is everywhere. Great Britain now occupies all this new land, and they conclude it needs to be protected by British troops to avoid trouble with Chief Pontiac of the Ottawa Indians. So Great Britain enacted a law called the Proclamation Line of 1763. Here, colonists could no longer settle west of the Appalachians to prevent further uprisings with the Indians. By the way, in the coming section on governments, I'll show you a picture of a Pontiac GTO. I had a '69 Goat when I got out of high school. Awesome cars. This seed, the Proclamation Line of 1763. It boxed in the colonists and told them where they could live. Imagine how the people felt. Their country just won a 7-year war, gained land, and told to keep out. Note the light pink area. Mercantilism, another seed. Here, it's all about raw materials and manufacturing. It's an economic philosophy. Basically, the premise was this. Nations would be stronger by having the most gold and silver to buy weapons and ships, the most natural resources, leading to more exports to access more customers. Remember all those expeditions looking for gold? The colonies were constrained to focus on supplying natural resources to Great Britain. The mercantilism seed, constraints on manufacturing. Another seed, currency collapse. The British outlawed the use of paper colonial currency to clean up the money supply. This forced the colonists to scramble for ways to cope. We take for granted the stability of the U.S. dollar. Is that a good assumption? The next seeds, taxes. One tax after another was levied on the colonists, and one after another they said no. Often they just stopped buying British goods and sacrificed. Do we sacrifice today? Think about it. They lived in a self-governing mode for 150 years and were basically left alone. I guess you could say they had a no-tax mentality in their blood. For Parliament was across the Atlantic in Great Britain, and yet there was no colonial representation in Parliament. A seed we all know, taxation without representation. The Stamp Act. In colonial times, they had no TV, no computers, no phones, no internet. The only media was paper. So what made this tax so hated? It put a tax on every kind of paper imaginable, from legal documents like marriage certificates to playing cards. It touched all aspects of colonial life. The government was everywhere in your life. The Stamp Act. It brought out a huge change in thinking among the colonists. For the first time, Great Britain placed an internal tax on the colonists. Remember when we said people didn't know better? Did you know a similar Stamp Act had been in force in Great Britain for about 100 years, and the people of Great Britain tolerated it? A very big seed, tax on every part of life. British historians say the Stamp Act was the single event that set in motion the path to independence. Ben Franklin published this political cartoon on what the Stamp Act would do to the British Empire. Note the names of the colonies on the limbs. The Tea Act. The background on this one sounds just like modern-day corruption in government and corporations. When we hear of our government helping out corrupt Wall Street firms, here you go. This is another case. The East India Tea Company, a large British corporation, actually governed the Bengal area of India for Great Britain. Well, they owed the British government a huge amount of money. So corrupt officials came up with the scheme to help them pay back the British government. The idea? Let's give the East India Tea Company a monopoly over tea in America. Next seed. You do not force Americans who to buy from. As the slide says, enough was enough. On December 16, 1775, the Sons of Liberty disguised themselves as Indians and boarded ships filled with tea and dumped it into the Boston harbor. They pushed our ancestors too far, and they rebelled against tyranny. What came next? King George III and Parliament enacted a series of laws to leave no doubt that they were in charge. They shut down the Boston Harbor until we could pay back the tax on tea. They shut down town hall meetings. They sent colonists accused of crimes all the way to Great Britain to stand trial thousands of miles away from home. We owe thanks for the poor management by King George III and Parliament, because in the end, England lost the colonies just as much as we won our independence. Greed, corruption, tyranny, they usually lead to bad things. The last seed, feelings of hopelessness. What a contrast. On the left, tasting the pinnacle of freedom and staying there for 150 years. Now, after 15 years of tyranny, Great Britain played their last card. By the way, what compelled me to get involved? I'll never forget how hopeless I felt on July 4th, 2009, when our government was buying car companies, making rules as they go, bailouts, and spending money like it grows on trees. It's 1776, and the seeds are ready to sprout. The past 15 or so years pushed many in the colonies to start thinking that now was the time. Take a look at all the seeds, from tyrannical rule, telling you where to live, where to buy things, limiting manufacturing, currency collapse, taxing all parts of your life, ending with feelings of hopelessness. It was decision time. Give in to tyranny or take the brave step toward independence. It makes you wonder. Imagine a world without the United States. What would have happened to slavery in our country? How about World War II, at the height of Hitler's reign, when Great Britain was all that stood between Germany's domination of Europe? Who would come to their aid? Just think, a Europe, North America, and Asia dominated by Nazism and communism? One person back in those days that did a great job in unifying the people, made them believe that the cause of liberty was justified, that was Thomas Paine. While many leaders of the colonists were promoting breaking away from Great Britain, it was not a slam-dunk case of support from the average colonist. He published a pamphlet entitled Common Sense. It laid out an easy-to-grasp case for independence that resonated with the average colonist. It helped build a critical mass of public support needed to move forward to independence. So, has history repeated itself? We've linked the events leading up to our independence to their impact on the individual. In the next few weeks, we'll make the link to today. On the left, the seeds of independence. On the right, the seeds of fear plaguing America today. Here are two clues when the degradation started, the title of this series, and Newton's third law. So, this is where we stand on our journey. We've just begun. Next up, a look at governments. Recall from Section 1, the goal is to identify the root causes of our problems, the real culprits. I've listed two as a sneak peek: political parties and corporations. Our calling. Remember, we've been here before. The first Americans, they laid it all on the line and stood up to tyranny, declared independence, fought a revolutionary war, and created the best system of government known to man, one that allows the individual to grow, prosper, and reach his or her full potential. Today, we can learn from the past. What's happening today happened back then. Let's step back from the fighting, take a different look at things, find root causes, the culprits, and find common ground. This is not your fault, but we will solve the problems for you and future generations. This is Bob Imbrigiotta saying thanks and God bless America. We welcome your feedback on these topics.